Welcome to Eastlake Online. This is a condensed version of what we do live every Sunday at the Uptown Theater. We know it's not always possible or even preferred to be a part of what we do in person, so that's why we made this. Thanks for checking it out. In just a minute, someone is going to give a short talk that hopefully resonates with you and helps you interpret what it might mean to follow in the way of Jesus, because that's what this community is all about. Figuring out what it might look like to live life the way that Jesus did, except in our current context with like cell phones and self-driving cars and stuff. We're a community where everyone is invited, included, and involved no matter what. And though our physical location is in the budding metropolis of the Tri-Cities, wherever you're watching this from, we want to invite you to bring a bit of heaven into your part of the world. Thanks for catching us on the interwebs. If you're looking for more content, follow us on social media or keep checking our website for all kinds of resources that we hope are helpful. And now, this.
Everyone's doing better than me. Hey, hey, I was having a good day. Hey, hey, now I'm worried about my big break. Oh, there's so much more to figure out, but I don't have the time right now. The sky could be on fire, but everyone's doing better than me.
Well, good morning and welcome to Eastlake or Eastlake Online. For those of you who are watching online on the live stream or on replay, we're so glad that you are here. Welcome back for those of you who have been a part of this series already, or welcome to this place or whatever. We are so pumped that you're here. We're on a series called Try Not to Suck. We started it last week. We sent out a big mailer. Maybe that's, if you're new or you're checking this out online or whatever for the first time, it's maybe because you got a mailer that looked like this, with a guy walking his dog and is picking up garbage and his dog's taking a dump on the sidewalk. And the idea behind this is really kind of came to us in terms of those events in life where we're trying to do something productive, trying to do something good, but at the same time, there's something about us that is also like working against us in that way. And we've been in those zones. We're trying not to suck, but we still find ourselves doing that. We find ourselves paying off debt, really excited, only to then find ourselves financing whatever it is that we think we need to have to own, to drive, or whatever. We order extra skinny, non-fat, sugar-free lattes, but then we ask for extra whipped cream. We're like, that's just going against it, right? Like, the math doesn't work out, whatever. And the reality is when we're approaching that kind of stuff, we're just like, I don't know. And this also shows up, my 3-year-old, the reason this kind of series was in my mind about this was my 3-year-old, actually it was London, who, when she was 3, was helping us do laundry, helping mom and dad do laundry. You know how little kids do that. She had her arms full of stuff, and she's walking over, and she reaches down to go grab something to pick it up. And as she reaches down, something else falls out, and then she turns, and she sees that, and she's like, I gotta grab that. And then something falls out, and then she turns and grabs that. And she did this for like several different times, and we laugh, and I laughed about it, and then I realized I do the same thing. Like, again, I pay off debt, and then I accrue more debt, or I see friends who are like, they go through a breakup and like, that's it, I'm done, I'm going to focus on myself, it's just going to be me. And then like 2 hours later you see them and like, I met somebody, and you're like, you just talked about how this is going to be a season. And you're like, I know, but then my barista was like, he's single and cute and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, and then you don't say that you judge them, but you judge them, or you judge yourself personally. And the response is always, I'm just trying not to suck in this world, man. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm just trying to do my things. We said this. We go to the gym. We try not to suck at the gym. We go play basketball. We try not to suck on the court. We go to Costco to get gas. There's 6 cars lined up behind us. We're like, I got to go fast. I got to do this right. Don't want to suck here. We do this all in so many different arenas. And then perhaps we show up to church or in a religious setting or whatever, a setting like this. And we carry that over into the religious realm. We say, I don't want to suck. I want to do, what do I got to do? How do I got to make this work? I just want to, do right. What do you want from me? That's what we would say in those settings. And churches have a track record of letting you know exactly how to live your life, right? They're not shy about that sort of stuff. And so here's what you got to do. And then you show up, you try that, or maybe you don't. Or if for everything, we treat it like a cost-benefit analysis, like we do with everything. Is it worth it to me? You say I need to live in this way, but maybe I try it for a little bit and things don't seem to work out for me or whatever. And we're always going, I don't think the value's there. That's how we treat it. And so we say we're trying not to suck, but it's just a matter of kind of relativizing all of these sorts of stuff. And then we get the question, then we get really thinking about it because, we're taking this more seriously now because we're being serious with our lives, and we say, I don't know, is this expectations that Jesus actually had for people, or is this something that you've added on to it? Because churches are notorious for saying, this is what Jesus says, but here's what we really think is like, this is how you really impress them, right? Here's how you go above and beyond and whatever. And so then the question becomes, what is it that is really expected of us, or what do we, what does God want from us? Or if I'm trying not to suck in this area, what do I got to do to kind of be able to make this thing work? Because we hear about the idea of Jesus' teaching being gospel, or that's a fancy word for just good news. This is good news. And yet every time we've heard somebody talk about what's expected of me, it never feels like good news. It feels like more of a to-do list. Like, I got to do more of this stuff, and then perhaps God will be impressed with me or like me enough to bless me with whatever it is that he's blessing me with. So my goal in this series, for those of you who are kind of searching, kicking things around, if this idea of trying not to suck resonates with you, especially in the area of religiousness, and for whatever reason you decided to give church a check out or whatever, my goal is to give you kind of a distilled version of kind of what Jesus said, and what I think is good news for us, and what he's calling us to, and what he invites us to. As we said last week, it's not a pushing things on us, it's an invitation towards. If we believe that God is the creator and knows us best, then perhaps we should listen to him when he says, this is what I think is best for your life. And whether I'm successful or not, or biased, but what I said was this: everything that we have about the teaching of the person of Jesus comes to us from four different gospel stories or narratives: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We call them the four gospels. That's like the narrative in the church that we say. It makes up the first four books of the New Testament. Four different people with four different versions of what they saw and experienced. Some of them firsthand, they were disciples. Some of them secondhand from other people. But it all comes down to that. And then what's unique about that is one of those guys, his name was Matthew, or the author calls himself Matthew, whatever, said, or decided to, when he presented his material, break it down into what's called the 5 teaching discourses of Matthew. Like 5 times in his narrative in the book of Matthew, it says Jesus went up, he opened up his mouth, and he said these things. And then it's like a long block of Jesus teaching something. And then it ends with, and then he sat down, and then, and then everybody was amazed by his teaching. And then it talks about his miracles and his stuff and all of the activities that he did until the next time when he sits down and teaches. It's almost like he took everything that he said and then like distilled it into like just different sermons. And one of those sermons, the very first one, shows up in Matthew chapter 5. It's after the birth narratives of Jesus. And in Matthew chapter 5, he goes up on a mountaintop, similar to like a la Moses kind of sort of thing with Sinai or whatever, recreating all that. And he gives us what's called the Sermon on the Mount. So even though I could, if I was going to distill it all down and say, here's, basic Jesus teaching, Jesus' whole corpus, or, everything about it, instead of doing that, we're going to talk a little bit about the Sermon on the Mount, because I think that's a good distillation of everything that he talked about. And then I think it goes even deeper than that. I think there's a distillation that takes place above that. But in that Sermon on the Mount, what we get is Jesus' ethic for living. Here's what a life lived in the right way looks like. He starts off with these Beatitudes. Lucky are the people, blessed are the people who listen to this and who do it in this way. Here's the ethical picture for living. Here's his elevator pitch, if he had one. You could say that Matthew is trying to put into categories teaching of Jesus, followed by the actions of Jesus, and then leaving it up to us with what are you going to do with it. St. Augustine, really famous kind of guy who wrote a bunch of stuff, wrote about the sermon and called it the perfect standard of the Christian life that drives home one haunting question: what will you do with Jesus, or will you follow him? Will you follow him? So, in other words, we should be reading these types of things and being like, all right, 5 through 7 with the Sermon on the Mount, the action, the response. What do we do with this? And this has been a community, this church specifically, a community of people that we're trying to get together, trying to look at and explore what it would look like to live in the way and the teaching of Jesus in the 21st century, and with the lives that we live and the families that we have and the jobs that we have, and how does this play out in this way? So this is kind of the talk that we're looking at. And even then, I was looking at Sermon on the Mount going, all right, so we'll do a series on the Sermon on the Mount, and it'll be kind of a distillation of all this stuff. But then I thought, there's so much stuff packed into just 3 small chapters. This would be like a 26-week series if I was to do this. Which is kind of fun. You've been to a church, perhaps. It's like we're doing 26, Sundays on 2 verses in Ecclesiastes, and you're like, some people are like, that's awesome. For me, I'm like, that sounds awful, right? And so I don't want that for me. I don't think you want that for you. Maybe you do. There's a lot of churches that do that. That's fine. So instead of that, because here's what I think too. I think if anybody was given church a shot, and you're not signing up for 26 weeks of anything, right? Maybe a couple. I might give you a couple, and then we'll see. So with that in mind, We're not doing the whole corpus of Jesus' teaching. We're not even doing the whole corpus of the Sermon on the Mount. We're taking the very first part of that thing. It's known as the section of the Beatitudes. Beatitudes is not a necessarily religious term. It just means like this blessed sort of virtue list that was given to us. Jesus starts this whole thing off by saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, and goes on and on and on, talking about a group of people who have it together. If you want to know what it looks like to those who are happy and to those who are blessed, here's what it is. So that's the list of Beatitudes that we're going to focus on for the next couple of weeks. It's presented as sort of a virtue list. Really, really popular in that time was for high-profile philosophers or thinkers to be able to present their vice and virtue list. A vice list, here's what you shouldn't do. A virtue list, obviously, here's what you should do. Aristotle had his, and a lot of times in those days, the virtue list had to do with pursuing wisdom and taking care of your family and all of the things that we would say are normal. I mean, everybody has virtue and vices. They might not call it that, but when you read a business book or a self-help book and they're talking about here's the way that you handle grief and here's the way that you handle pain or whatever, this is a virtue list. This is them saying this is what I think the vision of the good life is. Jesus does this exact same thing. He gives us his virtue list. Later on in Matthew chapter 23, he'll give us his vice list when he says, woe to you Pharisees who lay burdens on other people that you don't even want to carry. You expect things from other people that you don't care about even enough for yourself, right? You wash the outside of the cup, but the inside is all full. In other words, there's no authenticity there. You care about the external appearances of things, and you don't really care about what happens behind the scenes, and that's not good. So that's his vice list, But this is his virtue list. This is what it takes. This is good. This is what you should be kind of basing your life upon. And it's not, as we said last week, it's not a to-do list. It's not a don't hear this and be like, all right, more things to do. It's his statement of the people who are doing life the best have this going for them. And you're going to see this because there's going to be some things about this that you've respected in other people. You've seen them and you'd be like, they've got something about this. They're doing life in an exceptional way and they're not preachy about it. They're just doing it. And you want a little piece of that. Whatever they have, I kind of want that. Jesus is saying, let me explain this to you. And it's not typical of what you'd expect. In fact, the way that it works, it's almost like this reverse order. All of the things that you expect to be, in a virtue list, this person, handles their money well. They are good parents and they are good employers and they cheer for the Seahawks and all of the different things that you would think. That's for my 49ers fans in the front. Anyways, they're on the vice list if you haven't figured that out yet. There's that. There's all of these things that we characterize and we say I feel like they've got this thing sort of together. It doesn't match what we perceive it to be. And it's not like this progressively worse or progressively better. It just seems to be a little bit random and it seems to be a little bit off intentionally. Jesus is drawing these things out so much to the point that when Matthew had a chance later on to reflect on what do I remember most about Jesus teaching and talking about, he writes these things down. I keep remembering him talking about like this weird backwards sort of system, this kingdom of God that looks nothing like the kingdom of the world that we live in. Like all of the things that we value or society tells us to value, Jesus like flips it on its head and it's like this reverse way of doing things. We would say these people are unlucky. And Jesus would say, no, lucky are those who mourn, for there's going to be a comfort that comes alongside that. I'm jumping ahead. I'm skipping ahead too much. We're going to dive into these verse by verse. Here's what I did. We have 3 weeks more in this series, so today and then 2 weeks following this. There's about 9 different Beatitudes, depending on how you break it down. We're going to do 3, 3, and 3, and I think just for the sake of categorization, not that they fall into this category, but I think for us in understanding some things, there's going to be 3 on humility, specifically the humility of the poor. Then there's going to be 3 on those who pursue justice, and lastly, those who create peace. So those are going to be like the 3 things. And I printed this out on the note sheet on the program that you were handed on the way in, or you grabbed hopefully on the little table on the way in. There's a note sheet that looks like this, or if you're watching this from home, if you click on notes or whatever, you'll be able to find this. There's a translation of the Beatitudes, the Message version of it. Eugene Peterson wrote it a little while ago. That has it. That might look a little different from what you're used to reading, and I did that on purpose because I want you to read with some fresh eyes, and I think there's some good theology pieces that are involved in this as well. So we're going to read through verse 3 through 5, and we'll save 6, 7, 8 for next week and 9 and 10 for the following week. All right. Verse 3 through 5. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there's more of God and his rule. You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought. We're going to break this down verse by verse. You're blessed, that first one. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope with less of you, there's more of God and his rule. There's this sense in which those who have nothing are easily more inclined to rely on God. When you have less going on for you, you're kind of lucky in a way. You tend to lean towards trusting in God more than trusting in yourself or your stuff. An example showed up this week for me. My dad and mom came over this last week. We sat around the campfire, this fire pit thing in the backyard, and they announced kind of his plans towards moving towards retirement. He's of that age, right? And we kind of got a glimpse of it. His best friend just retired from Boeing like 6 months ago, a year ago. My dad bought an RV, which is always a sign that something's changing and happening. He's been going fishing and doing all these kinds of things at any given time of the week. And I'm trying to figure out, how do you stay employed and do this? I don't understand it exactly. And so then he calls me up on Tuesday, and he says, hey, man, we're going crabbing in Newport on Thursday. We're going to drive over Thursday night after work, Friday, Saturday. Can you go? And he's, again, calling me on Tuesday to make this happen. And I'm like, no, I can't go. And he's like, why not? And I said, I have a job. I have 4 kids. And he said, this is what he says to me. You never do anything fun with me anymore. This is what he says, totally guilting me. And he's probably watching this and dying right now. And I'm like, that's not fair. You can't guilt that on me. And he said it with tongue in cheek, obviously, but, and he says, why can't you go? I said, well, I have a job. He's like, I do too. We're making it work. We'll figure out, take your work with you, whatever. And then I go, I have 4 kids at home. And he goes, you can't play that card with me. I had 4 kids, and I'm one of the 4, right? And I said, yeah, but you were dead broke when you had 4 kids. There was no option to go traveling and doing fun stuff. We were like, do you want to play Scrabble or Scattergories at home? What's free, right? There's a difference between when you have nothing to go do, you're content with staying home because there's no other options to go out, right? We would go out to eat like 1 time a week after church on Sundays. That's when we would go out to eat. And now, there's nights where we'd be looking at each other, do you want to do it tonight? I don't know, maybe not, whatever. There's like so many different options. Those options were not available to us. By default, we had to be content with where we're at. And maybe you grew up in a similar home where you had we call it realized poverty. I realized that we were poor, right? As a kid, I didn't realize, we call that unrealized poverty. I had no idea that we didn't have a lot of money, like all of our friends, whatever. But anyways, those are these two different categories that maybe you can find yourself in one of those two. Or more likely, what Jesus is inviting to us in this is, you're blessed at the end of your rope, is this idea of realized or contented poverty. Like, I realize that I don't have all of the things I would like to have, and yet I'm content with it sort of anyway in this sort of category. It would help us to think of this outside of just financial distress, by the way. Matthew and Luke both present beatitude versions. In Luke's version, it's blessed are the poor, because Luke has this focus on kind of financial. Matthew adds poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit, kind of saying, yes, it's finances, but it's also other things too. Blessed are those who don't have a lot to point to and answer the question, am I good? Am I okay? Am I doing fine? This like self-worth that's defined in your stuff. Matthew would say, blessed are those who don't have a lot of things to point to be like, I know that I'm good because all of these things are in place. I've had a job for this long. I've got a marriage. I've got a spouse that loves me. I've got kids that love me and want to go fishing with me and crabbing with me. I've got all of these different sort of things that are in play. And Jesus says, you know what? Lucky are the people who are still content and don't have a lot of these things to point to. Don't have things, because their reliance is on God, and they're there by default. They're there because they choose to be there, and it's a good spot to be in. Scott McKnight wrote a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. Here's what he says. Here's what he describes in this way. An economically, physically impoverished or oppressed person, this is who Jesus is talking about, who not only recognizes her or his need, but also trusts in God for full redemption. The poor in spirit love God enough to trust God, love the self aright, and love others enough to form alliances of hope, compassion, and justice. Blessed and lucky are the people who are at peace with themselves, at peace with God, and in community with other people, regardless of their circumstances. And even in the midst of the poverty of their life, when other people are like, I'm so sorry, there's just so much against you. And they're like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's not where I find my joy. It's not where I find my peace in life. My peace in life is found in my relationship with my Heavenly Father, my relationship with myself, my health of my self-awareness in this way, and in the community that I find of people formed around compassion, justice, and hope together. This isn't, by the way, this idea of like this super religious version of we'll just trust God and everything's going to be fine with no sense of desire and justice, or there's no sense of pain in the way that we kind of process. This is not pain-free. A way of existence. This is not a stop complaining, just deal with it and trust God, right? Over and over, what we see in Old Testament scripture and throughout the life of the people of Israel and all the people that Jesus is talking to have experienced and know what this pain feels like, this gnawing sort of stuff that's going on in their life. There was a couple of different groups of believers or Jewish kind of sects, SECTS, not to ruin your day, sorry about that. Of different believers who believe different things. And so you've got Pharisees, you've got Sadducees, you've got Zealots who are like all about it. And then there was this group called the Essenes. And these Essene people were all about peace. They were all about like disregarding society, doing our own thing. These are the type of people who you have met before who like moved to Montana, bought a ranch, and don't see anybody anymore. You're like, remember that guy? He just bought a ranch in Montana. He just lives off the grid and does his own thing. That's the Essene kind of category. And they didn't do it in isolation. They would do it in groups of people. One of those people, one of those communities was found, or evidence of their existence was found right outside of the Dead Sea. They had these caves that they would store their documents in, that you can go there, you can see kind of old building structures. And then a while ago, back in the 60s, there was discovered some caves that housed some well-preserved documents from their community. Some of them Old Testament documents, which is called this whole thing was called the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is a huge find because they found these and they go, this Old Testament scripture is legit because look at how it kind of feels in this way. And then they also had sort of commentaries from their religious leaders about what it was like to live in that community. And one of those Dead Sea Scrolls reads like this. This was the ethos or the feeling or the culture of this group of people who have removed themselves from society and are trying to make sense of this and live in a contented poverty sort of way. The humble he has not spurned. Speaking of God, obviously the pronoun there, he being Yahweh, God for them. The humble he has not spurned, and he has not overlooked the needy in trouble. He has kept his eyes on the weak and paid attention to the cry of orphans for help. He has listened to their cry, and because of his abundant mercies has shown favor to the meek. He has opened their eyes to see his ways and their ears to hear. Like over and over again, this cry of the orphans, this we believe in a God who cares. We believe in a God who understands where we come from and invites a helping hand to kind of get us into the spot. You see this sort of, like there's a pervasiveness of humility in this. Like we don't have a lot to point to and be like, we're successful because of all of this. We've got nothing. You see this also in the prayer of Mary, the mother of Jesus. She's approached by an angel in the birth narratives. In Luke's version of this thing, the angel says to her, you're with child and it's going to be this amazing Messiah that we've all been waiting for, and you're going to name him Jesus. And her response has nothing to do with, it's about time that God did something for my life. I've been really good. I deserve this. This is about me. This is awesome. Yay me. Listen to what she says in her, this is called Mary's Magnificat or whatever, her prayer, her song. It really becomes the song that she sings. And Mary said, I'm bursting with God news. I'm dancing a song of my Savior God. God took one good look at me and look what happened. I'm the most fortunate woman on earth. What God has done for me will never be forgotten. The God whose very name is holy, set apart from all others. His mercy flows in wave after wave on those who are in awe before him. He bared his arm and showed his strength, scattering the bluffing braggarts. He knocked tyrants off their high horses, pulled victims out of the mud. The starving poor sat down to a banquet. The callous rich were left out in the cold. He embraced his chosen child Israel. He remembered and piled on the mercies, piled them high. It's exactly what he promised, beginning with Abraham and right up until now. Even with all of this, it's not about her. She points this to this God's plan for the people of Israel. It's this massive thing altogether. There is a humility that is pervasive in this way, and she's able to get there because she's got nothing else to go off of. Why did he pick me? I have no idea, but I'm happy to be a part of this. The humility of the poor is the perfect blend of the economically destitute who nonetheless trust in God and put their hope for justice and the kingdom of God in God. Which then begs the question, if we're listening, intently on this, can you be rich, wealthy, have things that most people would say that's a person who's doing well? Can you have some of those things and still trust in God? Can you have these things and be blessed if I'm not at the end of my rope, and if I'm not like worried about where next month's mortgage payment's going to come from, if I'm doing okay, if I'm taking care of this, am I okay? And that's how, by the way, we should read all of these Beatitudes. If this is who Jesus says is in, what does that mean for me? We think critically in this way. And we read this. If we don't feel like we're at the end of our rope, if we don't feel like we're destitute in this way, what does this mean for us? And this is the same exact question that the disciples had with Jesus. They see this rich young ruler come up to him one day. This guy goes, I followed all the rules. You've told me, here's what I think it means to be holy or whatever. What else do you have for me? Is there anything else? And Jesus says, go and sell all your belongings. And he walked away sad because he had a lot of stuff, right? And then the disciples, who didn't have nearly as much as this guy probably had, to go, this is a really hard teaching. Like, what do we do with this? Is it possible for the rich to enter into the kingdom of heaven and not being like go to heaven, but like in this mentality of operate with this kingdom of heaven sort of mindset? And Jesus says it is difficult. It is hard. Lucky are the people who have nothing to go off of. Their default is to trust in God. But you who have, are going to have an extra temptation to rely on your stuff that people who don't have. It's not impossible for you, but it is like a camel going through the eye of a needle. It's really, really hard. So when we read this in today's sort of mindset, and as we read the Beatitudes, it would be healthy for us to see this. Blessed are those who are at the end of their rope. They trust in God by default sometimes. I don't want to wish poverty on you. I don't want to wish destitution on you and be like, it's righteous to struggle, guys. Everybody give. And by the way, you can give at the blue bins at the back as you leave. It's kind of garbage or whatever. Like, that's garbage. So that's not what I'm talking about. I want you to be successful in all of this. But I do want you to, in your wealth, be good rich people and be aware. They have a leg up on us. There's going to be something in us that rests in our stuff that when you don't have it, by default, you're better off. Now, the world says we're better off. The world says those who are rich are doing good. They are lucky. Happy are the people who are rich. And Jesus would be like, nah, happy are the people who are not rich. They've got something ahead of us. So that's a tough, this idea of the humility. And you've seen this, man. You see this in people who, in spite of their wealth, have a healthier understanding of generosity, healthy understanding of money. You've seen people who have less than you. You've seen them, they have less than you. You know that in whatever, a job, everything else, and they're more at peace with their finances and with their life than you are. And you're like, I should be better off. Like, why am I so stressed about this? Because they get this, and we want that for ourselves. Jesus would say, let me tell you about this is lucky are those kind of people. All right, verse 4. We're going to go faster through the next two, so you're not looking at your clock going, this is going to be forever. You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. This is the classic, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, who have something to mourn about, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who both grieve in their experiences of tragedy, injustice, and death, and reach out to others in grief and compassion. See, we would say the typical way of the world would be, lucky are those who have nothing to mourn about. How you doing? I'm great. Anything going wrong in your life? God, I can't think of anything. I'm like, it's really, really good. Oh, great. You're blessed. How lucky for you, right? And Jesus would say, no. Happy are the people who mourn. For there is going to be a comfort that comes alongside of this that is going to resonate so deeply with them. They're going to be more aware of how things are held together, not with like positive circumstances in life, but in a God who cares for them. And this idea of mourning too, like we don't want to be known as complainers. We don't want to be known as whiners. We don't want to, we're afraid to kind of bring that into our spiritual life. Like God only wants us when we're happy or whatever. And yet when we read the Old Testament, what we see is Jesus kind of pulling this old phrase, this idea, this mentality of these people who, the Psalms, by the way, are filled with an author who writes about how long, O Lord? Why are you letting this happen? Right? This isn't fair. I've been good. What are you doing to me? Right? Why are you allowing this sort of things to happen? And it's not unlike the things that we've said in the midst of our own personal trials and tribulations. And he understands and he goes, lucky, you're lucky. When you have something to complain about and whine about and be frustrated about and look at, you're like, you're lucky. God, it doesn't feel like I'm lucky. It feels like I'm being hosed. That's what it feels like. And Jesus would say, no. There is a fulfillment, a something that comes alongside this that is when that need is actually met by something that can sustain it. Because what happens? We get so broken, we mourn, we go through this grieving process, and finally we just resolve, fine, your will be done, or whatever. Fine, I'm going to choose to love you. I'm going to choose to believe in you and your goodness in my life. And I don't know how this is going to work out for the good, but like you're going to figure something out. And when you see that with people who have like no runway to be able to actually believe that, and you see that and you actually believe them, and you think that that's authentic and it's true, there's something in you goes, man, I want that for me, man. I want that for me. Blessed are those who are forced into these situations through life circumstances, who get there because of this. They understand that it's all sustained by him anyways. Like eventually we all get there, right? That's what Jesus would say. Lucky are the people who get there early on it. Verse 5. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That is the moment you find yourself proud owners of everything that can't be bought. This is our last one for today. Translation that you probably grew up with if you grew up in church is, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Meekness being like this sign of controlled strength. Meek isn't like, oh, I'm so shy and I'm just awkward around people. It's a matter of having the ability to do something but choosing not to do it. I could react in anger, I could react in frustration, but it's not how I'm going to do it. Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's doing his prayer. He's got his disciples around him. They're falling asleep while he's praying. Eventually, they're approached by people with torches getting ready to arrest Jesus. And Peter, in an act of valiance and bravery, pulls out his sword, chops the ear off one of the guys, and Jesus says, no, that's not how this works. That's not what we do. We don't react in anger and strength, and we don't try and force our things on people. That's not how this works. You reattach the ear. It's a crazy story. But the whole point of it is Jesus correcting his disciples even in this moment. That was an opportunity for meekness, and Peter failed, as he would, like we all do. This opportunity to be humble and yet not seek revenge, but God's glory and the welfare of others. And the promise that comes with it, because there's always a promise, right? If you do this, then this will happen. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. They will inherit the earth. And a lot of times we are quick to identify, or Jesus' audience would be quick to identify the earth or the land as the physical location. For the Jewish people, the land has always been a big deal, right? We're going to leave Egypt. We're going to go into a promised land, a land that flows with milk and honey. And it's going to be our spot. It's going to be this. And even in today, I mean, the fights and the stuff that goes on over there is all about this land. They're crouching in our land. We were here first, blah, blah, blah. It's always about this physical land in this way. Jesus pulls in this phrase from an Old Testament, another Psalm chapter 37, verse 10 and 11. A little while and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they won't be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. So it's interesting when Eugene Peterson interprets this verse, which is so typically understood of as like dirt, physical dirt. Instead, look at what he says. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That's the moment you find yourself proud owners of everything that can't be bought. It's like all of this stuff that can't be purchased. You know, you can go purchase land and have land, but what he's trying to say is it's never been about like the physical dirt. It's about what that dirt sort of represents. When you went and bought your first home or your last home that you're living in or whatever, you had visions of what's going to happen here. I'm going to bring my spouse here. We're going to get married. We're going to have kids. We're going to have a rope swing up front. It's going to be a white picket fence. The kids are going to play in the yard. They're going to be like, Mom, you're great. All this kind of stuff, right? You're the best mom ever. And I'm visualizing all this stuff. What I want is a place of acceptance, of love, of all these visions of like the good life that I have. And I think it's going to come because of this land. What happens is you buy that land and then the dishwasher breaks down, the things break, and the house isn't big enough, and there's something happens. And it's like, we got to sell this. We got to get this new spot. And it's always about like this land that we think that we're creating, but it's not really land that we're buying, right? What we're buying is a sense of home, a place to belong, a place to be ourselves, a place to let our hair down, a place to be. That's what we want. So what he's saying here is this exact same sort of thing. It was never really about a plot of dirt as a place to call home, a place of shalom, a place to worship freely and peacefully. I want the peace that no amount of money, fame, acquisition of things can buy. You see this in people who understand the humility of place, who have a place that they belong in. It's nothing fancy, but it's theirs, and it's And it's something that you crave and you want, and it's about like this idea of contentment with where I'm at, and I'm proud owners of all of the things that can't be bought. I have what it is that you want. Like I have all of this, I have a sense of peace, this shalom in this home and in this place and whatever. So as we read through these, this is maybe we've never read the Beatitudes like this before, right? This is like, okay, that all makes sense. I never really wanted to be meek before, and I've never really wanted to like mourn before. Like I've wanted all of these other things. But when we see these and we go, God, grant me the peace that comes with this sort of stuff. Grant me the humility of the poor. When it's easier for them to get there, I don't necessarily want poverty, right? And I don't think that's what you're calling me to necessarily. Maybe, I mean, that'd be up for discussion. But help me to get there. Help me to see this. Help me to be the type of person who lives in this way, even with the stuff that I have. And help me for those times when I fall short. This is why we included this quote at the bottom of the note sheet that you'll see from a guy named John Ruskin, who wrote The Stones of Venice. Therefore, to every spirit which Christianity summons her to serve, her exhortation is this: you do what you can. You confess frankly what you're unable to do. Neither let your effort be shortened for fear of failure, nor your confession silenced for fear of shame. Last week I gave you this. I said take it home, put it somewhere visible, read through it, let these things kind of begin to shape us and mold us, and let these become visible in our lives as we read through these every single day. And this is something that, like, we go through this practice. We're practicing this sort of humility that comes with this way. And I read this and I go, I want that. Help me to get there. Help me to be there. Help me to do it as possible to be in this way. I confess to you frankly, and I'm honest to you when I fall short. I don't not attempt it because I'm scared I'm going to fail, and I'm not afraid to kind of talk about it because of fear of shame. Like, I know that I'm broken. I'm going to treat stuff. I'm going to react in anger and try and control things. I'm going to look at my stuff and be like, I think I'm doing good. I looked at my retirement. I looked at where the number's at, and I'm like, yeah, confident. I measure myself to all my friends and see where we're at. Feel good. Feel like I'm smart. Feel like I got a good job. Feel like my wife's cute. All this kind of stuff. We do all of these things. We evaluate based on other people instead of ourselves. We're not content. Well, anyways, God, help me to scrape all of that away. Help me to live differently than that. It's a terrible way to live, and I've tried that, and it's not sustainable, and it's not healthy, and it's not fun. You're inviting me into a different way. Grant me the peace to be able to live like this, the awareness when I fall short, and move forward in your grace and understanding of this. That is the invitation of Jesus. That is what I think Jesus is trying to emphasize when he says, here's what it would take to not suck in the world, right? He wouldn't say those words. He'd be much more gracious than me. But I think the message is still the same. Let's pray. Father, our prayer is that even just these first couple of verses would begin to shape the way that we look at life, the way that we parent our kids, the way that we do our jobs, and the way that we act neighborly towards the people around us, and act as like a husband or a wife in our marriage, or a boyfriend or whatever. It's just, I pray that it would begin to shape our understanding, our contentment, and help us to rely on you even more than we currently do. Give us the wisdom to know what that looks like in our life, the courage to act on it in your name. Amen. All right. If you like this and want to share this with a friend, or want to go back and listen to part 1 of this series, or have to travel in the next couple of weekends, there's an app you can download on your phone. Just look for Eastlake Tri-Cities, or you can go to eastlaketricities.com/talks. Follow up with that on there. There's a Connect card and a giving envelope inside of your programs that look like this. This is a spot to be able to mark down some next steps on the back of that, or give us a prayer request or life updates on there. On the front side is a spot for some personal information. If you are a regular tender, you know the drill. You can just put your name at the top. We do ask everyone to fill one of these out. It's our only way of tracking who has or hasn't been here. If you're a guest, make sure to mark that box on the lower left-hand side. This is first or second-time guest. If your hand gets tired from handwriting, there's also the E option via the app as well. You can fill that out. Let us know that you are here. If you're a first or second-time guest, we donate money, $20 for every first or second-time guest, to a different organization doing good things locally in our community and globally around the world. And for this month, September, Mirror Ministries, as Lena mentioned in the video, doing some work. I said for human trafficking the first service. What I meant was against human trafficking, right? We're not about that. Anyways, just to be clear, let us know that you're here so I know how much to donate. There's a giving envelope if Eastlake's home for you. There's your chance to help us out financially to continue to create a church for people who don't typically like it. On that sheet as well, on the front sided spot for some stuff you should know about, some things that were happening. One of them is an Eastlake 101, a dessert thing at our house. If you're new to Eastlake or wanting to call Eastlake home or whatever, we host these in our house, a little dessert. And here's where we came from. Here's the story behind it. Here's who's in leadership. Yada, yada, yada. Space is limited because there's only a few spots on my driveway. So we'd love to have you be a part of that if you're interested in that. And then if you're new, we also host a little like midweek podcast called Say Something Interesting. And it's a follow-up from what we talked about here. It's a chance to kind of get a little bit more of the flavor. Megan and I go through these and talk about things that were left out of the talk and or just stuff that comes up with it. If you have any questions that you want answered for that, there's a spot on the Connect card for that as well. All right, would you stand? I'm going to give a closing benediction for you, and then you are on your way to go watch the Seahawks game. Save us, Lord, from the grip of death, so that so often controls our lives. Help us each to say with the psalmist, I shall not die but live and declare the works of the Lord. Amen. May that go with you this week, whatever you're facing. If we have never met, I would love to say hello and put a name to a face. I'll be in the lobby. Make sure to come up and say hi. Other than that, have a great week. See you back next week for part 3 of Trying Not to Suck. See ya. Oh, don't